Ever post something online and then instantly regret it? Like you just hit the post button and you're like, ugh, did I just step into a minefield?
Oh, totally. It's like you can practically feel the angry comments coming.
Right. It's like the internet has all these unwritten rules and they change every 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's impossible to keep up.
Well, today's deep dive is all about tackling one of the biggest mysteries on the internet, content moderation. We're going deep into the world of big tech to figure out what we can and can't say online.
It's a big one, that's for sure.
So if you've ever wondered who decides what flies on the internet, or you're just curious about how this whole content moderation thing works.
Or maybe you've been shadow banned and you're still not sure why.
Exactly. Then buckle up, because we're about to break down this complex issue together.
Let's do this.
All right, first things first. Content moderation. We're talking billions, with a B, of pieces of content uploaded every single day.
It's mind-boggling when you really think about it.
It is. So how on earth does anyone keep up with all of that? I mean, someone or something has to sift through it all and decide what's okay and what crosses the line. And we all know AI plays a big part these days.
AI is running the show now, or so they say.
Right. But there are still humans involved somewhere in the mix,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. It can't all be algorithms, can it?
I don't know. It's a monumental task, and honestly kind of creepy when you think about the sheer scale of it all.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it makes you think, doesn't it? Like, who's really in control here?
Exactly. It's a little unsettling, to say the least.
Well, and it's not just the scale that's daunting. I think it's the complexity of what we're asking AI to do.
What do you mean?
Well, we're basically trying to teach machines to make judgment calls.
Mm.
You know, like, is this hate speech? Is this misinformation?
Yeah.
And those lines, yeah, they can be incredibly blurry.
That's a good point. It's not always black and white.
Exactly. And that's where things get tricky, because AI can only be as good as the data it's trained on. This article we're looking at today dives into something called AI bias. It boils down to the data used to train these systems. So if the data itself is skewed or reflects existing prejudices, well,
AI is going to inherit those biases.
exactly. And that can lead to some really unfair censorship online.
It's like that old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Right. 100%. The article actually gives this really interesting example about a user who shared a home remedy for, of all things, COVID-19. Now, their intentions might have been good. You know, maybe they were genuinely trying to help people.
Right, just sharing what they thought might work.
Exactly. But the algorithm, which was trained on all those official health guidelines, flagged it as potentially harmful misinformation.
Oh, wow.
Right, and that's a great example of how subjective judgments can creep into what we might assume is a purely objective system.
Whoa, that's unsettling. I mean, we've all seen those weird social media posts that get flagged for seemingly no reason, but it's another thing to think about how much human bias is going on behind the scenes.
It makes you wonder about all the stuff that gets taken down that we never even see.
It really does. So if even something as harmless as a home remedy can get flagged, I mean, how do we even know what the rules are? Who is ultimately making these decisions? Like, who is pulling the strings here?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Of course not. It's too complicated for that.
It is. But the article does talk about this interesting development. They use Facebook's oversight board as an example.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't that like their independent fact-checking group or something?
Sort of. They're trying to create a kind of Supreme Court for content moderation. It's an independent body with experts in law, human rights, the whole shebang.
Okay, so they're the ones who get to decide what's what.
Well, in theory. And they have overturned some of Facebook's decisions, like reinstating posts about the Uyghur Muslims that Facebook initially removed.
Oh, wow, so there actually is an appeals process.
It seems like it.
That has to be a step in the right direction, right?
It's definitely an attempt at greater transparency, I'll give them that.
Right.
But, and this is a big but.
I have a feeling there's always a but.
Right. It raises this crucial question. Does it actually address the root problem, which is centralized power?
Because at the end of the day, Facebook's still calling the shots.
That's right.
Sure, right?
Exactly. Facebook still controls the platform and, let's not forget, funds the oversight board. It's kind of like a restaurant appointing its own food critic. There's an inherent conflict of interest built into the system itself.
You're right. That's a really good point. It still feels like we're relying on big tech to regulate itself, which, let's be honest, hasn't exactly inspired a ton of confidence so far. So we've got these crazy, powerful algorithms making questionable calls, a lack of transparency in how those decisions are made, and this appeals process that still happens within the walls of big tech. Not exactly reassuring, is it?
Not really.
Yeah.
But it gets even trickier when you consider how much power these tech giants actually hold. And that brings us to the next part of our deep dive.
It's like who moderates the moderators, right?
Right. It's the big question. In this article, it really digs into that big tech's dominance, like it's a huge part of the problem. They even have a name for it, the bury or buy strategy.
Bury or buy. That sounds kind of intense.
It is. They basically become masters of their data. Like we're
Right.
talking mountains of data. And they use it to understand trends, to spot competitors before they even get big.
So they see someone gaining ground, and then what? They just, like, squash them?
Well, it's either that or they acquire them outright, bring them into the fold. But either way, they control the playing field.
I guess it makes sense when you think about all those apps we use that connect through Facebook or Google.
Yeah.
Even when you're not directly on their sites, they're still grabbing information about what you're doing online.
Exactly. It's like this constant data stream feeding these companies, giving them a huge advantage. Smaller companies, even if they have a better approach, a different philosophy, they just can't compete.
It's kind of disheartening when you put it like that. Like, even if I found a platform with, I don't know, more transparent content moderation, place where I felt like my voice actually mattered, if they can't keep up with these giants, they're basically doomed.
Yeah, the way things are set up now,
Mm-hmm.
it's really tough for anyone to break through. It's a classic monopoly situation, and unfortunately, we're the ones who lose out. Limited choices, stifled innovation.
And that feeling of being stuck, right? Like, I might completely disagree with how a platform moderates content, but I'm stuck with them because there aren't any real alternatives. It's like this weird digital echo chamber, but you don't even agree with the echoes.
And that brings us right back to content moderation. You might find a platform with great rules, perfect moderation, everything you believe in. But if they get buried or bought, it doesn't even matter.
It's a vicious cycle. So, are we just out of luck? This article mentions antitrust laws. Are those the answer? Can we break up these big companies?
Antitrust laws are definitely part of the conversation. In fact, the article specifically talks about that FTC case against Facebook. You remember that?
Vaguely. Something about them being a monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. They were accused of violating the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act. Basically, those are the laws designed to prevent monopolies and make sure everyone's playing fair in the market.
Okay, right. Like from way back when. Didn't realize they still applied. But how do they work with something as new and complicated as the internet?
So the Sherman Act, it's basically saying, hey, you can't just crush your competition to get ahead. And the Clayton Act takes it a step further and says, you can't use your power to manipulate the market and create a monopoly.
So the argument is these tech companies, they're playing dirty to stay on top.
That's the gist of it, yeah. They're using their size and influence to stifle any competition, to control what we see, how we interact online.
I mean, it makes sense, but can laws written, what, like 100 years ago, really deal with something as complex as the internet? These companies are practically woven into our lives now.
That's the big question, right? Are these old laws enough? Or do we need something new, something built for the digital age? Some experts say break them up, level the playing field. But then others are worried that'll stifle innovation, hurt the services we rely on.
So no easy answers there. But even if breaking up these companies is the solution, wouldn't that be incredibly difficult? Like they're huge, powerful.
It should be a massive undertaking, no doubt. But the article also suggests another route, a more fundamental shift.
This
Decentralization.
decentralization. Okay, that sounds pretty radical. But I like it. What would that even look like? Like for the internet as we know it.
Imagine a digital world, right? But instead of a few big players, it's a network of smaller, independent platforms. No more tech giants calling all the shots.
So kind of like back in the day, before, Facebook and Google took over everything.
Think of it like the Wild West, but digital. A much more diverse, user-driven internet.
Okay, a digital Wild West. I can dig it. But seriously, that sounds a little chaotic, doesn't it?
Not really. It would actually give users more control over their data, over the whole experience. We're talking platforms built on different values, different moderation styles even. So instead of these one-size-fits-all rules, we'd have choices. Each platform with its own vibe.
Yeah, I get it. Different platforms for different folks. Instead of trying to cram everyone into one giant platform that's supposed to be everything to everybody.
Exactly. And think about the possibilities.
Yeah.
It could spark so much more experimentation, lead to a totally new era of online spaces.
Yeah.
What if a platform was owned by its users? They decide the rules. The algorithms are transparent.
Okay, now that's next level. But how realistic is that? Are we talking about something that could actually happen, or is this more like what do they call it, a pipe dream?
It's already happening, believe it or not. The tech for this kind of decentralization is out there. It just hasn't really hit the mainstream.
Really?
Yeah. Think blockchain, cryptocurrency. That's all based on decentralization. And we're starting to see decentralized social networks and content platforms pop up already.
Wow, I had no idea. So why hasn't it taken off? If it's so great, why are we all still stuck with the same old platforms?
Well, it's tricky. Part of it is just, people are used to things the way they are. It's hard to get people to switch. Plus, there's this thing called the network effect. The big platforms, they're powerful because they have billions of users. More users equal more power, more influence.
It's like that saying, you got to spend money to make money, right?
Yeah,
Except in this case, it's more like, you got to have users to get users.
exactly. And that makes it really hard for smaller platforms to gain a foothold. It's like a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
People hesitate to switch because there aren't as many users on these new platforms, but the platforms need more users to compete with the big guys.
Wow. So we're stuck unless enough people decide to make the switch, like a mass digital exodus.
It's true. We have more power than we think. If we demand alternatives, if we support these new models, we can change the whole game.
Okay, I'm fired up. This has been quite the deep dive. We've gone from shadow bans and algorithms to like reimagining the entire internet. It's a lot to process.
It really is, but it's so important. These aren't just abstract tech issues. They affect all of us. The future of our digital lives is at stake here.
100%. We've got to be more aware, more critical. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this conversation, it's this. Content moderation isn't just about what gets taken down, it's about who gets to decide.
It's about power, ultimately.
Right. And right now, that power is concentrated in the hands of a select few. But maybe, just maybe, it doesn't have to be that way. This article, it leaves us with a powerful question. I'm going to leave it with you. What would a truly free and equitable internet look like to you? And what role are you going to play in building it?
Now, that's a question worth thinking about.
It sure is. And that's it for today's deep dive.